Morning all. Hopefully everything is working. Still wrestling with the new system. Oh, you probably can't hear me.
Yeah, trying to go viral or not go viral, as the case might be. There is actually a point to that, which I'll get to in a sec. Feel free to natter away. I'll answer any questions or anything towards the end. Housekeeping. Still not particularly well in the brain department. I might do a video on that later on, but I thought I'd try and keep this going. There's some sort of sense of normality, I suppose. Hope you're all well. Hope you're all doing fine. Hopefully. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so housekeeping. Let's see. My Machinations of the Space Princess Space Station, Satana Station supplement is nearly done. Kind of got away from me a bit. So there's a bit more work than I intended to do, still to do, but it will get there. And before too long, I need to commission some more art. So if you know any artists looking for work who can do sci-fi / pin-up style or heavy metal magazine style art, then let me know. What else is going on? Got another cyberpunk RPG session coming up soon. So I'll probably be producing some material for that, which I'll share with everyone, including a video briefing that I do for my players. Use the skills you have. That's a good tip for everyone. Right, news then. So the reason for the breath mask is that a lot of people are having trouble finding breath masks already, and there's a lot of knockoffs being sold, which we'll get to in the news stories. Weirdly, one of the best places you might still be able to find breathing masks is steampunk and industrial / cyberpunk fashion stores and things, because they often modify proper ones. So if you still want a breath mask, you can probably find them there. That's probably going to be the best place to look soon. It's going to be expensive, but you'll be left with a natty fashion item for later on. Of course, breath masks do not tend to be good enough to filter viral particles. So they provide virtually no protection for you. But if you have the coronavirus or the flu that's also going around, or any of the other bugs, yeah, it stops it when you sneeze or cough or breathe, spreading it to other people. So that's the point. Not to protect you, but to protect other people. And one of the things about the coronavirus, which is making it difficult to control, is that people who are spreading it are often completely asymptomatic for quite a long time. So it doesn't, they don't present symptoms, and they're spreading it around all sorts of other people. And there's a lag of like 6 weeks before it really emerges, and we actually have any kind of picture of how bad it is. So there's that to consider. It's going to kill less than 1% of people who get infected with it, but that's still lots and lots of people. That's going to be higher in low development countries and lower in high development countries, but the major impact is likely to be economic. So brace yourself for that. And also panic buying of things like breath masks is likely to be a bit of an issue. So that's the kind of thing you should keep in mind. Maybe lay in a sack of rice or something and some tins of beans or whatever, just in case. You know, it's not full apocalypse mode yet, but it's worth being careful. Let's start with something that's not the coronavirus, which I guess is our new Brexit, the sort of thing that I leave till last a lot of the time. Climate refugees. Some people still seem to think that there is nothing going wrong with the environment, that everything is fine and hunky-dory, and that there are no problems whatsoever, and it's all some kind of liberal hype, some kind of conspiracy to bring in communism or something. Those people are dumb. But even those people who do understand that this is going on, when you talk about climate refugees, you're likely to think about people living on atolls in the Pacific and so on, which were always very low to the ground, near to the sea level. those are the kind of people that are being displaced. That is true. That is happening. Those people are being displaced. Quite what's going to happen with them, I don't know. Whether they'll move or be moved to other islands, or whether there'll be a sort of Pacific Islander diaspora into other countries that take them in, climate refugees in a direct sense rather than an indirect sense. But that's the kind of people we normally think of. We don't tend to think of the Welsh, but we seem to have our first climate change refugees. This is a village called Fairborn on the west coast of Wales, and some people are labelling them that since their village, their area is now under enormous risk and is being kind of officially decommissioned as a settlement, as being considered, part of Wales, part of England, part of the United Kingdom, really, because the threat of sea level rise and coastal flooding and erosion means it's going to be essentially non-viable by 2054 at the latest. So they're starting to wind it down. It's been constantly flooded, constantly battered. The erosion's been going on for quite some time. As a result, house prices have plummeted. Residents at this point don't know when or where they're going to move, whether the government's going to help them out, whether they're going to get any compensation or anything. But basically, we're giving up on this village, and that's just the start. I'm wondering how long it's going to be before the levels get reflooded in the northeast and things like that. So, yeah. Climate refugees. It's not just for the Pacific anymore. We'll leave coronavirus to the end. So, next story. A UK naughty German fascist satanic group. I don't know whether satanic gets you demonetized. I don't get demonetized on this channel anyway, so what am I worried about? It's not monetized. Okay, UK Nazi Satanist group should be outlawed. Some campaigners are arguing. Teenagers are getting involved in this, as they always do in rebellious stuff. But a British neo-Nazi Satanist group should be outlawed by the government as a terrorist organisation. It comes this report from anti-racism campaigners. Hope Not Hate has issued a report, and amongst that it calls for the Order of Nine Angles to be banned. Exactly how genuine this is, I don't know. The images they've chosen to illustrate the story in papers and then on the BBC is a bit childish, obviously done by this 16-year-old boy. And this does once again highlight the issues around free expression, free speech, to what extent we tolerate it, to what extent we allow it to go forward. What do we do here? So this list of terrorist groups, one of them, Sonnenkrieg Division, apparently, has been influenced by the ONA's Nazi Satanist ideology. This bears further research on my part, but you know the shtick of the show. I haven't had time to look into it yet. But apparently they have a supernatural worldview that encourages the disruption of society through violence, criminality, and sexual offences. It's hard to square that with the far right's hatred of degenerates, really. This sounds more to me like a trolling attempt that's kind of gotten out of control more than anything else, but it does bear more research. I might go and have a look into that, or you might want to have a look into it. The Order of Nine Angles, is that a reference to the Black Sun? That's got more than 9 spokes. Is it a reference to the symbol for chaos, which leads me to believe it's more trolley? What's going on there. But the fact that it made national news is interesting, and that they chose to illustrate it with a rather childish sketch by a 16-year-old is rather interesting as well. In apocalyptic news, other than the coronavirus, we have North Korea to to contend with. Let me just make sure I've got live chat on properly. For God's sake, open the right thing. Yes, live chat selected. Alright. So yeah, while we're all dealing with the coronavirus and various other harbingers of doom, North Korea has fired 2 missiles in their first missile tests of the year. 2 unidentified projectiles, so it said. They're launched from the northeast coast towards the Sea of Japan. So they're being provocative and shitty, as per usual. Maybe they're thinking they can get away with this while the rest of the world is kind of preoccupied with the virus and so on. North Korea has been even more draconian than China in trying to tackle the virus and keep it out. So maybe they're hoping everyone will get ill and then they can do something stupid. Who knows? Experts are saying this is less provocative than previously, but it does still seem to be a problem. And unless there's some sort of progress in stopping North Korea's nuclear program, it's only a matter of time, albeit at the cost of beggaring their entire population, that they will have a nuclear ICBM. It's an engineering problem at this point, more than anything else. It's an engineering and refinement problem. So then you have a nuclear-armed rogue state with effective nuclear weapons and some sort of stockpile, and then that's a big issue. I think North Korea would be one of the few places it would be justifiable in invading, both to free the population, though most of them are probably so brainwashed they wouldn't welcome it particularly, and to put pay to what's a genuine threat. North Korea, Iran, Pakistan, this is all very different to how things were during the Cold War, because these are not rational actors. The USSR was a rational actor. The USA, for all its problems with evangelical Christianity, was a rational actor. And mutually assured destruction only works where you have 2 rational actors who aren't willing to push the button just for the sake of it, or for extremist religious or ideological reasons. North Korea, to me, seems likely to be someone that would use it. Pakistan seems to me to be someone who would use it. Iran, similarly, seems to me to be a nation that would be willing to use nuclear weapons because of the irrational ideology and religion that's present in these places. So we're actually in a much more dangerous world than we were during the Cold War in a lot of ways. I mean, they don't have enough armaments to unleash total global nuclear Armageddon. Hopefully the massive arsenals in Russia and China and the United States aren't on so much of a hair trigger anymore that an accident or an incident around North Korea or India would annihilate the entire planet. But I wouldn't be too sure of it. So there's a good reason why the clock is nearer to midnight than it has been in a long time. Pete Buttigieg has dropped. Is that how you pronounce it? Buttigieg. It seems too neat. He's dropped out of the Democratic race for the White House. He's probably the most significant person to drop out so far. Where his votes will go, I don't know. Warren, maybe. A lot of people who would support him just for the fact that he was gay might go to Bernie. Hard to tell. He was a kind of a non-entity as far as anyone outside the US was concerned. He seemed to be a pretty average corporate centrist Democrat. But he was doing okay, so it's a little odd that he dropped out. You got to wonder why, whether any wheeling and dealing was going on behind the scenes. They do look all set to cheat Bernie out of the nomination again, which I think would be a massive mistake. I think most Democrats will hold their nose and vote for whoever isn't Trump anyway in the upcoming thing. And from an exterior point of view, Bernie, for all the problems that he has, mostly trying to rehabilitate the term socialist, unfortunately, because most Americans are politically illiterate, for all the flaws that he does have, he seems to be the best choice to steal votes back from Trump. He appeals to a similar base, but without the taint of racism and empty promises and so on. If Bernie got in, I think you could expect him to actually do the things that he says and try to better things for the population as a whole. After all, he's been saying these things for decades. From a European perspective, it's weird that this run-of-the-mill, milquetoast centre-left candidate, Bernie, is regarded as some kind of extremist loon. It doesn't make sense. We've had a bit of a political scandal here in the UK. These things tend to stay under wraps more, which is what makes this interesting. Priti Patel is the Home Secretary now. She's, I think it's Indian, British, second or third generation, I think. We have this weird situation here where we have a very multiracial, diverse executive and cabinet, but they're all also extremely right-wing. You kind of expect some of that from the Indian immigrant population here in the UK. A lot of them are big business owners now, or started out as small businesses. So the Conservative Party seems to be a natural home for them. But the sheer level of antipathy towards the foreigners coming out of Priti Patel and the Home Office almost puts Theresa May to shame, unfortunately. But some accusations came out about Priti Patel that had really nothing to do with the hostile atmosphere and xenophobia that have been associated with her and the Department of the Home Office for some time, in that she's bullying staff, ranting, raving, throwing things at people, threatening people, just generally and genuinely being a massive bitch. And civil servants tend to be kind of quiet and in the background. But one of them, who was receiving this treatment and being briefed against in the government, took the radical step of coming out and saying this was what was going on, and he's taking the government to court for constructive dismissal. So basically being harassed and bullied to the point where he had to step down or wanted to step down, that's constructive dismissal. So, these reports have been confirmed by all sorts of people, everyone saying, yeah, she's pretty much a massive bitch. And yet, Boris has come out in support of her. Now, it's a kind of running joke in British politics that whenever the Prime Minister comes out and says someone has their full support, they're not long for their position. Whether that holds true in this atmosphere with this Prime Minister and this particular minister remains to be seen, really. I think Priti Patel will probably stay. I think the government will close ranks around her. I think her attitudes, her problematic attitudes and so on, are popular with the kind of people the government is still trying to court. So I think they might cling on. And there doesn't seem to be any ways or means to bring any genuine pressure onto this government. They didn't get a majority of the vote. Their vote share only went up by 1%, but they have a commanding majority in the House of Commons, so basically they can tell everyone else to go jump. They also have no respect or sense of propriety or history or precedent or anything else. So with this government, much like the Trump government in the US, I don't think we can expect them to do the right thing ever. Maybe if more lawsuits follow and she becomes incredibly expensive for the government, it may be non-viable for her to remain in that position, but that's the only way. That's the only way I really see anything changing there. We'll get to your questions and comments at the end. Speaking of Bojo, he's spawning. Him and his fiancée, now they're engaged and expecting a baby. This strikes me as a bit of a PR move and an attempt to distract from the previous story. So that's really all the coverage I'm going to give that, because I don't want to help him. But honestly, who looks at Boris Johnson and thinks, yes, those are genes that need to be perpetuated? Shagger Johnson. We'll leave coronavirus till the end. We've got about 3 stories around that. A positive story, or the closest thing to a positive story that I could find. The West Midlands is to finally get full access to ultra-fast home broadband. So a switch has been clicked over and fibre optic super-fast broadband has now been made available to about 1 million extra homes in the UK. This technology allows for, I think it's gigabit services. Most UK speeds are around 50 Mbps, so that's a hell of a jump in terms of speed. Of course, I live out in the countryside, and we only relatively recently, well, a couple of years ago now, I suppose, finally got really fast home broadband at the 50 mark. So I think it'll be a while before we get gigabit, which is a shame. But there you go. But that's the closest thing to positive news I could find, is that ultra fast internet infrastructure is being rolled out in the West Midlands. Judging from last time, we won't get it here for about another decade, at which point everyone will probably be uploading their consciousnesses to the internet or something. Who knows? In the UK, 2/3 of homes fail on energy efficiency targets. Now, it seems like a boring story, but a lot of the way that we can tackle climate change is individually and locally. So things like getting solar panels privately installed on your home if you can afford it, or home windmills, or home thermocouples, or solar heating units, anything like that. Also, insulation is kind of a big deal, or should be here in the UK. I mean, loft insulation's been a thing for a very long time. Cavity wall insulation's been a thing for a very long time. But about 2/3 of UK homes fail to meet long-term energy efficiency targets. Now, I have tried to tackle this problem here. We can't afford to get our cavities insulated. There have been various deals and offers from the government to have your roofs re-insulated with modern materials. I've contacted those services. Nothing has ever come of it in about 5 years. And there is a government scheme to make boilers more efficient. So living out in the sticks, electric heating can be unreliable in the winter. Gas, there's no gas lines out. So really our only choice is to have oil heating, which is quite expensive. You have to have a big unsightly oil tank. It's not particularly environmentally friendly, despite being one of the most efficient forms of heating. It's also one of the ones that's worst for the environment. So give with one hand, take with the other. And there has been this scheme to update boilers in older houses. This house was built in the 70s. The boiler is that old as well, I think. So I've been trying to go through this scheme to get our boiler replaced cheaply. I've got money set aside for it that I don't touch, and it's supposed to make it affordable, because a new boiler can be thousands of pounds, 5,000, 6,000 even, to get it all fitted in. And with this deal, that knocks that price down a huge amount. So there's this scheme. So you sign up to it, and then local heating firms will contact you. I've been contacted no less than 5 times to arrange an appointment, and not once has the boiler engineer showed up to do an assessment and to give me an estimate of how much it would cost. So there's all these schemes that are supposed to help this, but none of them are being followed through on. And you kind of got to wonder why, because we want to meet these targets, and one of the cheapest, most cost-effective ways to do that would be through these government schemes. But the subsidies for solar and wind are going away. I mean, home solar and wind are going away, and the subsidies for re-insulation are going away, and the subsidies for boiler replacement are going away, and yet this is one of the most cost-effective ways we could meet our carbon targets. And it's all fucked up, because the government just doesn't seem to believe in these things. The problem isn't the government doing these things, because that's what makes it affordable and available to people, out here in Radio Land. And he says it's not that approach that's the problem. The problem is that we have a Conservative government that doesn't believe in that approach, and so doesn't do it properly. I suspect that's a big part of the problem with American welfare systems. Sticking with willful incompetence. So we used to have a mishmash of different benefit systems. I'm still on the old version for my depression and anxiety and all the rest of it. And we're gradually being switched over to universal credit, which is this single payment system. And it's all mediated and moderated online. In theory, this is a fantastically good idea. In practice, it means a lot of people can't access it because they're not internet savvy, particularly older people. And it's being used as an excuse to slash people's benefits and give people a much harder time, basically. Because it's all in one place, if you get sanctioned on one benefit, you get sanctioned on all benefits. So it's a massive negative effect, and it massively reduces some of the most vulnerable people's incomes. I've been doing the calculations, practiced. Now, I stubbornly did not claim the benefit that I was owed for about 10 years. So I only started my claim in 2017 and only got my claims approved at the end of 2018. And I'm supposed to have a 2-year review period. But I've been doing these estimates, and if I get put onto universal credit, I will lose 2/3 of my governmental support. Now, I work as hard as I can, as much as I can, at the things that I can, and basically you get penalised for that. I would be better off just entirely collapsing in order to keep my benefits and to claim housing and things that I don't, right? I just get a top-up to make life tolerable, to top up the little amount that I can make from the small amount of work that I am capable of doing. I know I often seem fine on these videos, but I'm not really. At this point, I do the work that I do in gaming and writing and so on because it's the only thing that I can do. And I do YouTube primarily for therapy because it doesn't give me much in the way of money. But all these transfers to universal credit have caused incomes amongst the most vulnerable people to drop down, even the working poor. And that has massively ballooned the amount of people who are using food banks. And that's likely to continue to rise. And it's also led to massively more cases of depression and other mental illness amongst people who've been pushed onto universal credit, and a spate of suicides. So there's a study that's just recently been rolled out that shows this sort of spike in food bank usage is also reflected in a spike in mental health problems. So the number of unemployed people with acute psychological problems, distress, people like me, basically, but for different reasons, rose by about 6.6% to 7% between 2013 and 2018, which is the first rollout of universal credit. Bear in mind, universal credit isn't applied everywhere yet. It's being done section by section, area by area. And also being slowly rolled out because you stay on your old benefit until you come off it, and then when you come back on, you go on to universal credit, or if you apply for a new benefit, then you go on to universal credit. So it's a very slow rolling thing. But that rise represents almost 65,000 more people in England, Wales and Scotland who have acute mental distress, and about 22,000 who are clinically diagnosed depressed, like me, over that period. The government chose to interpret that as the study finding no causal link. If you know social studies and so on at all, you know that outside of activist circles it's extremely cautious and talks about correlations. But there is mounting evidence from multiple studies that this is causing real severe social and health and mental health problems. People are struggling to cope. That is an immense stressor on your life, and it makes people feel worse. Since finding out that 2/3 of my income would disappear under universal credit about a week ago, I've been on edge. It hasn't helped my mental health situation at all. There's also long delays when you get switched onto it, up to 5 weeks with no money coming in. You can get an advance, but then you have to pay that back, which reduces your benefit a lot. There's just so many issues and problems around it. Like I say, in theory it's a good idea, but the way it's being implemented and the way it's being used kind of dishonestly to fuck over people, this is not a good thing. Even worse, internal investigations into cases of acute mental distress and suicide, the case notes have been systematically destroyed by the Department for Work and Pensions. So we no longer have access, or don't even have potential to have access to their internal reports on what has been going on and what role universal credit has played in this spike in suicides, giving them plausible deniability, I guess. But I can tell you that any kind of extra stress increases the likelihood of suicide or self-harm. It's shit, and yet people write all these people off as scroungers. Getting a benefit, staying on a benefit, it can almost be like a full-time job. You know, you have to keep your receipts, you have to constantly fill out paperwork and go to assessments and so on. It's incredibly stressful, and it costs a huge amount to check on people and chase them up and look for fraud. Way more than it actually costs in the amount of people that cheat the system. Most people don't cheat the system. It's a handful of people. But we're more intent, and we're willing to spend more money punishing that minority than by helping the majority. Human psychology is a bitch. Roman Polanski. Occasionally he will pop up in the news relating to the entertainment industry because, lest we forget, way back when, in the 1970s, he had sex with a 13-year-old girl. Statutory rape. And later on she's come out and said it wasn't consensual, not that she could consent anyway. But then she's also said the case should be dropped. So, comme ci, comme ça. I in no way whatsoever wish to excuse Roman Polanski for the things that he did. Excuse me. The man's a predator and a dick. Drugs were involved. There's no question that this was a non-consensual thing. But it is something like 30 years old. And the case, while the case may be cut and dried, the trial and the legal issues around it aren't necessarily. Now, the reason this was in the news was because a film that he made, he won Best Director, and his film was put forward for like a whole bunch of nominations for the César Award in Paris. That's kind of like their Oscars. He got 12 nominations and won Best Director for An Officer and a Spy. I don't much rate Polanski. He doesn't make films that I'm particularly interested in, for the most part, with a couple of honourable exceptions. But a bunch of women walked out, most particularly Adele Haranel, I think her name is. And this put it all back into the news again. Now, all of that's preamble, but here's the thing. The trial around Polanski, the reason why he fled was because he was initially offered a plea bargain, basically, which he took. And that should have been the end of it, really. He would have gone to prison, served his time, been released by now. But then the presiding judge withdrew that plea bargain deal at the 11th hour, and so Polanski stayed outside the US and has never really been back, certainly for quite some time. So the real question here is not, did he do it, or is it acceptable? He did. It's not. The question is about the legal system and whether the process should go as it's supposed to. Basically, you're not supposed to be able to pull the rug out from under someone like that. And if the judge had kept going with what they'd said they were going to do, what they were going to do, if they'd kept to the spirit of that plea bargain, then he would have been to prison. Maybe he would have got treatment. Maybe he would have been rehabilitated. Who knows? He would be out by now, and this wouldn't particularly be a thing anymore. It's probably flared up because of the Me Too and so on. The 1970s were a different time, which is not an excuse either. If he did the same thing today, I don't doubt that he would go away forever, pretty much. But like all of these things, it's about nuance, and it's about the interaction of the justice system and the way we all live and what kind of expectations we have of the justice system. Plea bargaining, is it a thing? Should it be a thing? How's this all supposed to work? But those details, that kind of background about the judge reneging on the deal, or is it reneging? Never quite sure on that one. But those details tend to get lost, right? And I try to be scrupulously fair to a fault, even for paedophile rapists. Clearly a character flaw on my part. But yeah, it's not so simple. Back to willful government incompetence. So this crackdown on refugees and immigrants here in the UK, it's also the tightening, the restrictions, it's also having an effect on genuine refugees, people who are fleeing oppression in their home countries and so on. So there's an example on the BBC site. Anecdotes aren't dated, but it is a useful illustration. So there's this woman called Angel in the article, probably not her real name. She fled here in 2015. She's a lesbian. There's a lot of persecution and so on that goes on in Zimbabwe and other African nations of LGBT people. You know, murders, lynchings, that sort of thing. So she didn't feel safe, came here, claimed asylum. But how do you then prove that you're a lesbian to the Home Office when they're trying to crack down on you, on immigration as a whole, and to root out sort of cheating asylum seekers? Which again, yeah, we spend far more chasing a tiny minority of fraudsters than we do helping people who genuinely need the help, right? It would be cheaper to just take everyone at their word, and it wouldn't be abused anything like the amount people imagine. But if you've spent your entire life hiding your sexual orientation and living your life so far as the outer world is concerned, yeah, as a heterosexual, how do you prove to a grey suit from the Home Office that you are a lesbian? What are you supposed to do? Have sex with a woman in front of an observer with a clipboard? Yeah, where bureaucracy meets humanity, it just doesn't really work. So, you know, it's just another example of that. We need a human element, a variable element in these systems. And when I look at this points-based points-based immigration system that the government wants to implement, and the kind of income levels that they demand, and all the rest of it, I see an inhuman mathematical process that is just not sympathetic to the human element at all. And there should be something worked into these systems, like a few extra points or something that the assessor can gauge for humanitarian or other reasons, right? And just this example serves to show that it's really difficult to meet the demands of bureaucracy when it's remote from that human side. So I think we need to reintroduce some kind of humanitarian side to all of this, whether it's asylum seeking, whether it's immigration, whether it's universal credit, whether it's anything like that at all whatsoever. Right. As I said, I'll get to comments and stuff at the end. We've got 3 coronavirus stories. The Prime Minister is to finally chair a COBRA committee meeting. That's like an emergency meeting of the UK government, as the official UK virus count reaches 36 people. Now, as we covered at the beginning, masks don't actually help because they can't stop viral particles, but they will stop you spreading it to other people. We're already seeing some panic buying of that, and the reason I wore the mask at the start was to tell you that if you really do want a mask, and everywhere is sold out, look to steampunk and industrial fashion suppliers, because they often modify real gas masks and face masks and things. So you can still get them there. They'll be expensive, but you'll be left with something cool. But it's to protect other people from you, not vice versa. So there's 36 cases. Almost certainly means that many, many times more people are infected, because you can be asymptomatic and spreading it. I think they said 4 to 5 weeks, 6 weeks it can last for. So Boris hasn't exactly reacted urgently. We're not quite as bad as the Trump government praying to make the virus go away. But still, yeah. So we're finally getting an emergency meeting. Too late. And they're going to have some kind of plan. They did say they weren't going to close schools, and they advised people to self-isolate, but they left it up to individual companies whether they'd pay people sick pay or whatever. And wouldn't you know it, Witherspoon's is basically saying, well, you can stay home and self-isolate and we won't fire you, but you're also going to lose money. And just just the sheer foot dragging and stupidity and lack of taking this seriously is likely to be a bigger problem than the virus would have been itself. Amazon is removing masses and masses of overpriced goods and fake cures for the coronavirus from its stores. There's a lot of cheap, worse than useless face masks on sale on Amazon, so make sure it's from a reputable supplier and a reputable name if you can. I've also noticed Facebook has been flooded with that. There's also a lot of pop-up rip-off stores on Facebook generally now. So if you're going to buy anything from a Facebook ad, make sure that company has a history and has been around for a while, because there's a lot of rip-off merchants on there. Face masks, obviously, and other sort of coronavirus coping supplies are also being heavily pushed to capitalize on people's panic. So keep a cool head. Buy from reputable suppliers. If you must buy from Amazon, make sure it's an Amazon recommended or a store that has an outside of Amazon presence that's been established for a few years, that sort of thing. Or buy a modified one, but make sure it's made from a proper gas mask or breathing mask. And lastly, on a lighter note, China has banned the game about disease response called Plague Inc. from being sold in China. Why, I don't know. Maybe because it highlights flaws in China's approach, but yeah, there you go. Right, shall we have a look at what you've been saying? Daniel says, good morning. Good morning, Daniel. DAO Democracy says, did you hear about Steemit and Steam? No, I'm on Steemit, but yeah, let me know. Greenfang says, America is not a rational actor. I think America as a whole is. I don't think this current government is. I think there are still cool heads in the military and so on. DAO Democracy says, I believe an attempted takeover took place and the network consensus technology kicked in and froze accounts related to Steemit Inc. The DAO protected itself from the corporation. That's interesting. I will have to look into that later. Yeah, I do use Steemit. It's not a particularly great platform. Some of the more recent updates have made it better, but yeah. Daniel says the harm principle seems a good level, but probably too lenient for the UK. I'm assuming that's to do with the free speech argument, but yes. I will have to look more into this supposed satanic Nazi group to see exactly what the fuck is going on. DAO says, lucky buggers getting fibre gigabit in the UK. Well, outside London and the West Midlands, I doubt it's particularly available. Daniel says, I hope VM sends me a DOCSIS 3.1 modem. I hope you get all the things you want from Branson Santa. Rob says the subsidies for solar went away because they were too successful and the government deemed it unnecessary to continue incentivising them. Yeah, but then it's fallen off a cliff. So, yeah. Greenfang says cavity wall insulation is pretty useless. External insulation is better, even if it's lower R value, but not an easy retrofit, especially on brick-clad homes. Yeah, I've got brick with air gap insulation. The house was actually built by my grandfather. I don't think external insulation would be very easy at all, especially since it's textured brick here and it's quite crumbly. So I'll have to look into that. Morning, Adam. Good luck with the interview. Right, is there anything else anyone wants to ask me or comment on before I pop off? I've got to clean the house, and then I'll probably do some other videos later. Trigonometry, if you watch them or listen to them, they had an interesting thing about the housing crisis yesterday, which is worth checking out. It's also worth checking out because they apparently triggered a whole bunch of extreme right-wing people by refusing to have Black Pigeon Speaks or other irrelevant dunderheads on there to talk, and so they were horrendously spammed. So I had an entertaining evening counter-trolling them. The YouTube lawsuit, is that the one where they won the free speech case to say that they didn't have to guarantee anyone's free speech? I think it's going to have to take government intervention. I don't know that lawsuits is going to work there. This is the problem, right? So we have the internet, we have YouTube, we have Twitter, we have Facebook. These now constitute the commons wherein people, talk, communicate, discuss, wherein political life takes place and social discussion takes place, but they're privately owned. So the public square is privately owned, and this is a problem. The existing laws and so on that we have will tend to favour the corporation, whichever one it happens to be, over the user and over the public and over the public utility, in the sense that the commons is useful to the public, not in the sense of a publicly owned utility. So I think it's going to take a paradigm shift in the law, which we're unlikely to see anytime soon, to see any kind of guarantee of our personal individual rights and freedoms on platforms like YouTube. All of that assuming that that is what you were talking about. Yeah, so I might do a video on the trigonometry thing later today, between tidying the house, and I might do this Black Dog Diary. I've been threatening to just let people know what kind of headspace I'm in and why. I guess I try to be open about the mental health issue thing, and I did get some messages this weekend from people who appreciate it, so I guess it's still worth doing. Right, I will see you all later in recorded videos if today goes okay. Take care, everyone. Zang.